So let's go through this. There are basically four principles to leftism. Essentially four principles to leftism. The first and most important principle of leftism is that equal outcome is the only value. Not equal opportunity, equal outcome. The only thing that matters is that everybody ends up in the same place. The idea here is that the world is an unfair place. And there are some of us who learned that in kindergarten, that life is unfair. And then there are people on the left who just don't seem to care about the fact that life is unfair. Because life is unfair, they say that it's our job to correct the unfairnesses of life. And not just when there's societal unfairness, when somebody's actually being discriminated against, which we all agree we need to do something about, but when we are talking about actual imbalances. I mean, when the Declaration of Independence says that all men are created equal, it doesn't actually mean that all men are created equal in their abilities. It means all men are created equal in their rights. You know, obviously, there are some of us who are smarter, and there are some of us who are dumber. You know, there are some of us who, like me, who are never going to play in the NBA. I'm 5'9", I'm Jewish, and I can't jump. You know, and no matter what I do, that will be the case. And that inequality is not inequity. The left identifies inequality as inequity. They are the same thing to folks on the left. For people on the left, if something is unequal, that means some great injustice was done. And when you look at that with any sort of rigor, you realize how silly that is. I mean, the same argument, so for example, they will say that in Ferguson, Missouri, a disproportionate number of black people were pulled over for speeding in Ferguson, Missouri. Clearly, this was evidence of racism on the part of the Ferguson Police Department. Well, if you say, well, 90% of the players in the NBA are black, is that evidence of racism in the general manager's office of the NBA? Clearly not. But the idea, just because there are two unequal numbers does not mean that somebody is being victimized or that there is a victimizer. It's possible that black folks in Ferguson tend to speed, which, by the way, is the case in New Jersey, where there was another one of these issues several years ago, and they did statistical sampling. What they found is that blacks were actually being under-arrested for speeding, that black folks were actually speeding at a higher rate of speed. But again, anytime there's an imbalance, there's a need by the left to fix cosmic injustice. So if one person has $4 in a room and one person has $1 in a room, the view of the left is that somebody who has $4 must have done something to screw the guy with $1, because equal outcome is the goal, not equal opportunity. And this is actually really counterproductive for folks, because this is why you hear so much now about income inequality. Income inequality is the stupidest term you could possibly come up with. Income inequality is a complete waste of time as a political issue, and you shouldn't fall into the trap of even discussing it, because the truth is that any good person is not really worried about income inequality. Any decent person is worried about poverty. If you're worried about the rich guy and not the poor guy, then why? What did the rich guy do? Just because he's rich, does that mean that he chained somebody to a desk somewhere or put them to work in a slave mine? It just means that he engaged in more voluntary transactions of worth than the poor guy. So I'm worried about the guy who's impoverished. I'm not worried about the inequality. But folks on the left, because equal outcome is their goal, not prosperity, equal outcome, they would rather have everybody equal in squalor than unequal in wealth. And the proof is in the pudding. In just a month ago, there was an article in the New York Times with this headline, quote, "As Cuba shifts towards capitalism, inequality grows more visible." Well, right, because Cuba was a complete shithole, and now it's not. Right? It's moving toward being a not shithole. And it turns out that one of the ways that happens is by some people prospering. The problem in Cuba is not that is not a problem of inequality. The problem in Cuba is that everybody was poor. The problem is everybody was using their cars to float to Florida. I mean, if the country were that great when it came to equality, people wouldn't be using 1956 Chevys loaded with inflated tires to try and make it to Key West. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. The second principle that animates the left is group justice rather than individual justice. There's another name for group justice, that's social justice. Social justice, you should understand, is actually evil. Social justice, when people say it, it's an actual evil. Because anytime you put a modifier in front of a term that is inherently good, you turn it into a perversion of itself. So correctness, right? If you are correct, there's truth and there's something false, you are correct. Once you add political in front of that, you're not talking about truth and falsity anymore. You're talking about if you say the wrong thing, you get shot. Which is why, by the way, political correctness was a term that was coined by Mao. It was. Political correctness comes straight from the Maoist handbook. And the same thing is true of social justice. Justice is a good. You do something, it's either good or it's bad, and you get what you deserve. That's what justice is. Add social in front of that, and you're inherently saying injustice is better than justice. Because whether you are guilty or whether you are innocent is irrelevant. If you're a member of a group, then you must pay the price for something that you didn't do. Right? Social justice suggests that, I, as a supposedly white man, Jews became white people as soon as we became successful in America. I, as a white man, I'm responsible for paying slavery reparations, for example, in the name of social justice, even though all of my ancestors were busy getting killed by Cossacks in Russia at the time that slavery was taking place. And less than 5% of white Americans alive today have ancestors who ever held slaves. Every white person in America, though, has to pay because of group justice. How is that just? It's not. But it's group justice. It's social justice. And valuing the collective, valuing people in terms of groups rather than individuals, is how you get to the point where murder in the name of the collective is okay. All you have to do to see this is just compare the American Revolution, which was about individualism, with the French Revolution, which was about collectivism. Right? The American Revolution, John Adams wrote in the Declaration of Rights for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, he specifically wrote about all men being born free and equal with certain inalienable rights. It mirrors the Declaration of Independence in the United States. If you look at the Declaration of the Rights of Man in France during the French Revolution, it's the opposite. The 1789 Declaration of the Rights of Man says, "The principle of all sovereignty resides essentially in the nation. No body nor individual may exercise any authority which does not proceed directly from the nation." It says, "Law is the expression of the general will." So the collective always rules the individual. The group always rules the individual. And because the group always rules the individual, and because the group is always, this is a very utopian view of the world. Because, see, the left doesn't believe in individual justice or that it can be achieved, but group justice can be achieved. But to pursue group justice is a utopian vision. You have to have this utopia in your head. Well, if the group is more important than the individual, and the individual is in the way of progress, just steamroll the individual. And that's why you end up with communism killing 100 million people. Because the bottom line is that if you are seeking equality of outcome on a group level, and somebody is an outlier, well, they're standing in front of the machine, and they have to go. Individuals are either tools of the regime or they are obstacles to the regime. The third principle of the left is that truth is of absolutely no value. This is actually a principle. This is not just a slander. This is not just me saying they're liars. Truth is of secondary value, I should say. It's not of no value. It's of secondary value. Truth does not matter to the left because when you are pursuing a higher goal, then the truth takes a back seat to pursuing the higher goal. Because fairness is the only criterion of morality. Fairness, equality of outcome is the only morality. It's the only thing that matters. Truth comes in second. And so that's why you see folks on the left literally make up situations in order to pursue a higher goal. Right? Officer Darren Wilson and Michael Brown. For months, all we heard was hands up, don't shoot. For months, all we heard is that young black men were being gunned down in the streets by evil white cops for no apparent reason, and Michael Brown was the case in point. He was a gentle giant. Right? That was what we heard from the media for weeks before they released the tape of this gentle giant strong-arm robbing a convenience store 10 minutes before he was shot. Right? He was a gentle giant. He was a wonderful young man with no problems with the law. He was just a great guy. And he was walking down the street, and he was shot from behind, and then he turned around, raised his hands, and he was shot in cold blood on the streets of Ferguson. And we got we had members of the media on CNN doing hands up, don't shoot. And it turns out that hands up, don't shoot was an absolute lie. And it was a lie from the moment that they released the first autopsy report. The first autopsy report showed that he was not shot in the back and that he was not shot with his hands up. And that was very early on, but it didn't matter. It still had to be pressed forward. And the idea was, well, that may not have been true, but it backed a larger truth. You can't base a larger truth on an actual lie. Larger truths are based on smaller truths. They're not based on falsehoods. But this is what we do on the left, right? On the left, it is important to promote smaller falsehoods in order to achieve larger truths. And so, for example, what you will hear is that women are put upon in American society, which of course requires massive government interventionism. And in pursuit of that, you will hear people cite the statistic that supposedly 1 in 4 women on college campuses have been raped. That's a nonsense statistic. It is not true. It is an absolute falsehood, unverified by any scientific sampling ever done. The rate is significant, by the way, and you can tell this empirically by the fact that if parents actually continue to send their children to a place where 1 in 4 of them have a chance of being raped, they are the worst parents on the planet. Right? Why would you possibly send your daughter to a place where they have a 1 in 4 chance of being raped? The truth is, there are very few places safer on the planet than a college campus for a young American girl. And yet we have to spit out these lies in order to achieve a larger truth, even if the larger truth is not really true, that women are put upon. The 77 cents on the dollar. Right? Women make 77 cents on the dollar. No, that's not true. Women do not make 77 cents on the dollar for the same work. If you remove all of the confounds, the statistical confounds, meaning that if you get rid of the fact that they do different jobs and the fact that they have different amounts of time in the workforce, and the fact that they have kids, and the fact that they graduate college at a different age, if you remove all of those, what you actually see, and this is according to Time magazine, not according to me, is that women in the top 50 major cities in the United States earn 4% more than men for the same work. But you'll never hear that statistic because it doesn't pursue that larger truth. So truth is always secondary. The fourth principle of leftism is that force is a good in the service of these principles. The use of force is fine. The use of force is actually praiseworthy. That if you want equality of outcome, it's okay if you have to use a gun and bring a gun to the party. You want to know who's the fascist in any given situation, ask who's bringing the gun to the party. Ask who's bringing the gun to the voluntary exchange and forcing somebody to do X or Y. And the left is fine with using guns for this purpose. Because after all, who's going to coerce fairness? It's not going to be society. Capitalism doesn't coerce fairness. It doesn't coerce fairness of outcome. It coerces fairness of opportunity. But it's the left that suggests that if there's a rich guy and a poor guy, if there are three of us in a room, and I have more money in my wallet than the other two of you, then which is likely at this point in time, you're college students, then the two of you can not only vote my money to yourselves, you can then take out a gun and force me to give the money to you in the name of equality of outcome. It doesn't matter that I've spent significantly longer in the workforce than you have, and I have a grad degree, and I've been working my ass off for years. That doesn't matter. None of that matters. All that matters is that there's an inequality that's happening here. Even though I don't know any of you, right? Even though I've never stolen anything from you, I've never engaged in a voluntary transaction with any of you, right? I must have done something to victimize you, and therefore force can be used against me. So those are the four basic principles of leftism in a nutshell. The first is that equality of outcome is the only value. The second is that the collective trumps the individual. The third is that truth is a secondary value, not a primary value. And the fourth is that force is okay to use in pursuit of primary values.